Good evening and welcome to Spirit, broadcasting live from the Dennis Arnell Equality Center in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma, the headquarters of Oklahomans for Equality, and you are tuning in to Spirit. This is our happy hour Spirit discussion. We always discuss these things about during the happy hour, so I hope you've got your beverage. I have my iced tea that I've been nursing all day long from Mexicali's. And our special guest, Clinton, what are you drinking tonight? Looks like
I have Gatorade in case y'all wear me out.
yeah. He'll make sure they'll make sure they're totally hydrated. So K.O. Morris, our technical media consultant, is in the background. And so tonight we're so excited to have a special guest. And we're not international yet, but we're interstate. So tonight our guest is joining us north of us from the great state. Do you live on the Missouri side or the Kansas side?
On the Kansas side.
Okay, is joining us from Kansas. And so tonight we are in Kansas, Dorothy. And so we've got a special guest joining us. And if you have questions for our guest tonight, because we're going to get down and really talk about where religion can be hurtful and harmful, and the trauma that it leaves in our lives, and the work that's having to be done for individuals to help them be able to recover from that. Our guest tonight, that's what he's doing with his personal time now. And we want you to be free to ask questions. So if you have questions for our guest, Chaplain, our spiritual advisor, that's what we call them on Thursday nights. If you have a special question for our spiritual advisor, you can post that on Facebook, and KO is monitoring that, and he will make sure that he drops that in our Zoom chat where our spiritual advisor can answer those questions. So first of all, let me remind you of what Spirit is. Spirit is our program here at the Equality Center, and where we discuss, and I've lost my notes, and I don't know if I'll be able how to say this. So it's our program that discusses the intersectional work in our lives of religion and sexuality and gender. And so we're going to cover all of that, and all of those can come together in our lives in healthy ways or unhealthy ways, helpful ways or harmful ways. And so that is the purpose of Spirit. And we have some core principles that govern our time together. We have individuals who join us who are reconnecting with their faith. They are recovering from spiritual abuse. They have renounced their faith, or they're just wanting to hear the discussions regarding faith and sexuality and religion and the components and how it impacts sexual expression and sexuality in our lives. So we have four core principles. We call them C.A.R.E, C-A-R-E. The first one is you have to be committed to the full inclusion of LGBTQ persons within faith communities. The second part is you have to affirm your commitment to interfaith dialogue. You have to be willing to discuss and embrace and understand another person's position, their interpretation, or what their experience is, because everybody's experience is valid. Everybody's opinion counts because it's their opinion. And so you have to be willing to affirm an interfaith dialogue. R is we resist any coercive, proselytizing, conversion attempts to try to force some kind of view or thought or expression or doctrine or experience on individuals. So you have to be willing to resist any of that. And then E stands for eradicate the harmful practice of conversion therapy, reparative therapy, pray the gay away, whatever you want to call it. It's still harmful, hurtful. And tonight I'm excited because our guest can understand this from a personal experience and then the effects on a person's life. So I want us to start from the beginning. Our guest tonight is Clinton Shane Bradley, who we're just going to start. Clinton, first of all, I want you to tell us, first of all, who you are, where you're from, specifically a little bit about your childhood, your teen years, your young adult life, and your personal life now. We just want to know, what we call your address, about this is how you've lived, where you've lived, how you live now.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Toby. And thank you everyone for allowing me to be here and just share this space with you. To be quite honest with you, my dogs are probably about to go crazy because my husband just got home from work. So there's going to be that. So there they go. But I think a lot of it I have a lot of layers to my life. And it was up until this last year that living here in the Kansas City area on the Kansas side, there I was fired from my employer. My seat at the table, my executive level opportunity in a pretty conservative organization. They knew I was open. And so I thought, this is my moment. And then understanding through the marginalization of the history of my own, and then also understanding law, working as a tenured human resources professional, I started to see more about how much the marginalization actually took place, not only in community and in church and religion, and then also, and in families, but also in the corporate. And so I was terminated based on my sexual orientation. And we had to go through a settlement, but there was an opportunity where I had this break, just this mental break out of fear of abandonment, and had to acknowledge what that abandonment was, and the rejection from my own family of almost 20 years ago, or actually it is 20 years ago, and thinking, I have built so much from having nothing, and I'm about to lose it all out of this fear of abandonment, knowing that I have a loving home and a husband. And I hadn't dealt with the pain of the rejection and the conversion therapy. And so I hadn't really understood how it was going to manifest itself. And it finally did. And so in the form of a psychotic break, and I had never experienced one before. But through all this, I started to take a focus back onto what is God. What is the God that I grew up knowing? What is me walking away from God and trying to understand what it is that I believed in, not the condition of what everybody else told me I should believe in or what I was indoctrinated to believe, but what is it that I believed in? And what are the things throughout my life, being international deployments as a soldier, being a horse wrangler, being a journalist, being an international fashion model, being a donor father, what were the things that I learned? And in all that, I understand that God was much more than what I grew up to know. And I knew that there was a God, something that was this idea of a God within all of us. There is this universe that is beyond our comprehension because we were created by that. And I wanted to tap in more into understanding that. And I reached out, I called out, and I was like, I need help to those that love me and my chosen family. I was like, I need help. And I sought a counselor who could deal specifically with religious type of PTSD. I had worked with soldiers transitioning from military service back into civilian and home life. And I understood what that PTSD was. And I was like, is there such thing as religious PTSD? And when I looked it up, and there was a doctor out of Berkeley who had specifically written the book on leaving the fold. And I reached out to her and she answered. And I said, I need to know where this all started, and I need to start deconstructing where this trauma is. And then I need to understand what it is that God, and identifying God within, and what my higher purpose is. And that's what kind of started the road on this journey of understanding more about God. That was not the box that society around me at the time put him in, but it was something bigger. And I found that it was this big universal light and energy and our interconnectedness with one another that made us more of that loving unit that was inspired by what we saw in the Bible with Jesus and those wonderful individuals that gave us that example. And so that's what brought me here today, is like, where's my purpose? I want to start shedding a light and more education on these harmful effects after being a survivor of suicide and conversion therapy.
So, Clinton, first of all, rarely do we have somebody who is so qualified to speak to so many levels on the spirit. Now, we have a lot of incredible people, just have absolutely been amazed at what we've been able to hear and experience as they've taken us on their journeys. Boy, you've been through a lot. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Silver City, Oklahoma. I graduated with a class of 20 from Olive High School, probably about 35, 40 minutes from y'all, and never lost the y'all. And so I grew up in small town Oklahoma, and so definitely in the Creek County area. So definitely the odds were a little stacked against a queer kid growing up.
And did you come from a religious family? I mean, was religion important to your family?
Yeah, I grew up in the Free Will Baptist Church. Small churches ranging, on Easter Sunday, you might get 60 in attendance. And so very, very religious community, very much led by their doctrine. Not a lot of speaking when it comes to spirit, when it comes to God, but more about the doctrine. My family was incredibly religious, very fundamental in their beliefs, and also very strict about things. We weren't, as far as like, we were not allowed to have premarital sex. That would not happen. We were not going to drink and do drugs, all those things. And then and also we were not going to be gay. And that was a big fundamental part of my family that they were completely against. That was the ultimate sin. That was the abomination. And I knew at a younger age that it is what would separate me from my family. So
when did you become aware of your sexuality and realize that it was possibly unique and different from other people around you?
Well, I always tell people, like, I wasn't wrong. And I never want to discredit anybody else's story for coming out, but I think there's something that we need to shift in the narrative that we tell LGBTQ plus, which is, I always knew there was something wrong with me. And I always want to say, shift that. There wasn't anything wrong with you. There was something wrong with the area, the space, the place you were, but there was nothing ever wrong with you. And so I had to recognize that at a younger age. When it was after church one Sunday evening, my mother is heating up the leftovers from Sunday afternoon church. My grandma's there. We just got done with the church service. And my dad and my grandpa are out in the den, and my dad just starts yelling at the TV screen. I go out there and I see two men from the Tulsa Gay Pride Parade. They were putting it on the news that evening, on the 6 o'clock evening news. And these two muscular men with tank tops were hugging each other. And there was this moment, because I didn't really like girls. I didn't think much of it. I was out and about with my horses and riding. I was young. I was probably 8, 9 years old. And there was this moment where I saw those two men and I go, oh. And I remember that feeling, that connection. And then all of a sudden it shifted. And my dad called out abomination. My mom started yelling out scriptures. And it was in that moment that I started the condition that, like, they don't like this. I didn't feel I was wrong, but it was, they don't like this. The family, the people that brought me into this world, they don't like this. And I was starting to get bullied in school because my actions were a little more feminine. I looked like a girl. People would mistake me. Some teachers would mistake me for a girl. And so I was starting to see in that very delicate, tender age, that I'm like, oh, it's not me at the time, I thought, but it wasn't me that was wrong. It was the space. And I had to start identifying how I could survive through that.
So that's a very, I never realized that me working on the Gay Pride Parade was going to influence a child in, where did you call it? Silverton?
Silver City, Oklahoma.
Silver City, Oklahoma.
It's on Highway 51 on the way to the water.
That's where you would realize, oh, there's my people.
There
And
I am.
so sorry about that. Your parents can blame it on me, I guess.
I'm gonna send, yeah.
So went to high school. And did you go off to college or go into the military?
Yeah.
I mean, where was it you finally, as an adult, settled some of those things in your head and begin to accept that you were gay?
Yeah. Well, it was quite a struggle. I had a full ride scholarship that I had earned through a Congressional Agricultural Scholarship to Oklahoma State University. And my sister had visited with me on the campus, and I have an older brother, younger sister, and she was younger and went with me my senior year and saw two men holding hands or something in the library. Told my mother, and that was that. It was going to be off to the association that I was a part of in the church. It was off to their college in Nashville. And to be honest with you, at the time, I was
my
like,
alma mater.
Yeah. And so at the time, it wasn't so much about, they were willing to pay for it. And also the fact that it was out of state, away from everything. And I thought, I just need to get out of here. I had some health issues. And so I had to end up coming back home, and transferring over to the sister college in Moore, Oklahoma. And that's where I started to come more to terms in myself. And I openly admitted that I wasn't gay, but had homosexual tendencies. I had homosexual thoughts. And so according to the handbook, I had to report that. And so I had some very, very lovely, I think, intentional friends, maybe, who thought it was a demon and tried to exorcise it out. So it apparently didn't work. So, but I think they just thought they were spiritual leaders on campus. And so, well, that didn't work. And so I finally revealed to a friend of mine of how much I was going through. And she was from the San Francisco area. And she ended up being more accepting with me about who I was. And she goes, "What are you going to do?" I said, I'm going to have to tell the dean. The dean of men. There was a dean of women, but there was a dean of men at the Bible college. And so, and in the handbook, it's either you have to go through therapy or you get expelled. Well, I went through therapy, and which started with Harvesters at first. It was a program out of Houston. And I was like, I don't have the money. I can't go down there and do that. And so the dean was like, well, I'll put you through it. And that was really awkward. And I don't think he knew what he was doing. And so then from there, I left college because there was I was starting to have a lot of heart condition issues. And so from there, that's where the gap from college up until the time I left, that it's very complex. That's where I started to really immerse myself into conversion therapy. I got into Exodus International Program. I started to go through one of the churches out in South Tulsa that had sponsored it.
At Grace Fellowship.
At Grace Fellowship.
Yeah.
They would not allow me to go to, I thought it was very odd. One of my first sessions, the counselor would not shut the door all the way. And then he would leave me out of group sessions. Finally, it was the admin assistant. She explained to me at the front desk that it's because my look was too tempting and that I wouldn't be good for the other associates who were going through the program. So I had to do one-on-one. And so it was a lot about, they wanted me to write out a lot of my sexual experiences. And because they were certainly very open about telling me about theirs in some way to leave me in guilt and shame in it. So long story short, we also had a tragedy in our family that 18-month-old cousin drowned in a swimming pool. And it was local news. It was a big local news thing because of my family status. And what ended up was the family needed someone to blame. And because I had come out openly, several members of the family have deemed me as the scapegoat because I was the reason they didn't receive their miracle for this child dying. A lot of the guilt and shame became more. I was living a double life, working at a hospital, going to conversion therapy. And it just got to a point that I couldn't handle it. And I never thought that, I always felt of myself as this, and because I had also had already signed into the military, swore in, and was working as a journalist, but I always found myself to be, through the bullying and everything, it's like I can handle it. But again, we don't know what manifests and what happens underneath the surface. And in an attempt of desperation, I tried to take my own life. They had to take me ambulance to the hospital, to St. John's, where they pumped my stomach, and I had to stay in an inpatient facility. It was there that was the turning point where a therapist came to my room, and I was in a room with someone who was schizophrenic, who had also fits of rage. And to be honest, that was much more safe for me than being around my family. I could handle that. And that was more safe for me. And it was the gentleman, when the counselor came into my room and he goes, "Let me go talk to your parents." And I said, "Nope, I'm not gay. I can fight this." And he came back probably 10 minutes later, the counselor did. And he goes, "I can't even imagine the torment you must be going through." He just looked defeated. And he slipped me a Post-it note and he said, "Call this therapist." And it was through my benefits program at the hospital I worked at. And I did. And it was that therapist that really taught me about what is my business and no one else's. And what is my relationship with God is my relationship. I signed up for my first deployment, volunteered, because it was going to be my avenue out, away from my family's control. And it was when I said goodbye. And it's one of my favorite songs by Shine Down, "Sometimes Goodbye is a Second Chance." And so that's kind of what got me to a point to get out, not get out, but where I had to start finding myself. I had to go make some failures. I had to go walk into hell so that I could come out on the other side whistling. I had to do these things to ensure that I was strong enough to get through them, because there was a purpose that God put me through the things, or that he felt me worthy enough to go through the things I did to be stronger on the other side.
So Clinton, let's talk a little bit about the conversion therapy experience. So these were programs that passed themselves off as licensed, certified, clinical therapists and counselors, yeah, who could help you overcome your same-sex attraction.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you brought up Grace Fellowship. I know when I went through that program, I thought it was the oddest thing. They wouldn't let you go to the bathroom by yourself. You had to go with an escort. And then even in the church service, they would have a stanchion around us. And when it came time for everybody to hug everybody and tell everybody they were glad to be at church, we were not allowed to hug the rest of the congregation unless there be a transferring of demons. Yep, can't make any of this shit up, folks. This is really,
it's real.
Yeah. And so you're probably aware of this. In the state of Oklahoma, we've had a bill that was introduced at our state capitol this year, which would go right the opposite direction of where other states have tried to ban conversion therapy. It would have actually allowed you to practice it. It'd be licensed by your Oklahoma Mental Health Association, and you'd be able to use tax dollars if you want to come in there and with your kid and say, "Hey, my teenager says he's gay. I want you to use tax dollars to fix him and make him be straight." So is it as full of shit as you're an eyewitness? You've experienced it. You've been through it. Pardon me for my French. I always say this. I did not come out so I could kiss men. I came out so I could use strong language to really express the emotion that I had in my heart. Mm-hmm. But is it as awful and twisted and smoke and mirrors as we claim it is?
It is beyond that. It is an altered, delusional reality. And I've done psychedelics. So I can tell you right now, and that was part of my trauma therapy. I can tell you right now, it is so twisted in a delusional, altered reality. My parents, in this same delusional state that they believe in, of this cure, that in some way, if they accept me, just the mere acceptance of me somehow separates and pulls them further away from God.
Yeah.
Which is such a contradictory when you think of things. And I don't like anything to be compared to when people would say, oh, I love the sinner, but hate the sin. Even Jesus sat with the prostitutes and the murderers. I go, I'm neither one of those. Thank you. But what's interesting is like, well, if Jesus did sit with them, then why are you separating yourself more from me? And so I've always found it so fascinating, not that we're still talking about this in 2021, but we know that the movie Boy Erased certainly brought a lot of awareness to that. But also the really big full of shit part, the really big one, is the fact that my mere presence, your presence, our presence, their presence, his presence, her presence, is the fact that it is an infringement on someone else's ability for their religious practice. You're muted, Toby.
No, I was muted on purpose. I was communicating with Ko. I wanted to make sure if we had questions.
But that is the biggest piece that I find. I'm like, there's no logic in that. The simple logic that you think by giving me a hug separates you from God, or the fact that my ability to marry my husband, my ability to serve in the military, my ability to have an equal opportunity in the workplace somehow infringes on your ability and blocks you from walking into your church and place of worship.
Right. Yeah, probably the painful story you just shared of, I mean, I've heard preachers say they've blamed hurricanes, they've blamed tornadoes, they've blamed the pandemic on us and our sexual orientation or gender identity or a world accepting and enlarging their understanding of sexuality. But that what you just shared with how your family was traumatized by this tragedy in their life, that they looked for some evidence of why they would be under God's curse, and you were what they settled on.
Right.
And so families, when they go through this, when they've built this social circle and this system that they're built into, and then when they have a child who they're supposed to love and give everything for, they have to choose, do I stay in the system and abandon the child? So never have I had it more perfectly described as what a corrupt system that would require you to abandon your child, turn your back on your child, and then blame your child's existence for anything else bad that happens in your life.
And the only explanation with that, and what helps me get through it and understanding and identifying more like that mental health side, you know, we've been told we've been wrong. And when I try to switch the narrative for young people and for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, I'm like, we're not wrong. What's happened is we have been gaslighted in this way to deflect from those that really do truly have a mental illness. They've not understood what it is like to be themselves. They don't know how to place themselves in this authentic way because they've never disconnected from their own trauma. I've even had this last year, I've had to go back and find out things about my family members and a lot of traumas that they suffered through. And I always kind of said like my life has been an axe and I've had to grind it. And it only took until last year at 42 years old that I had to take that axe and chop that cord that I was connected to, that cord of shame and guilt. And I think I was like, I don't want for the next individual, whoever's listening to this, to wait that long. Like there are some tools to recognize what is mental health, how you can cognitively look at somebody else when they start shedding light on you that you're the wrong, you're the guilt, you're the shame. It's like, but I'm not. And there's a way not to fight back with that, but to figure out where that person's mental health is coming from and being able to identify that individual.
Yeah, well, it's a safety factor. They're going to have to, went through it with my own family, and so much what you're describing. I mean, your family's forced into this situation. It's like they're torn if they're going to stand with you, or are they going to have to redefine their whole life? They're going to lose their other family. I mean, we have had people on here before who told us how their parents accepted them, but they said, don't tell your grandparents.
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody else.
Yeah.
Don't let anybody else know. And it's because of this deep fear that they're going to lose their place.
Yeah.
They're going to have to make new friends, or they're going to have to dig deeper and understand.
And we're an excellent community to ask how you rebuild your tribe. Think about the number of us that had to go out from that rejection. We've had to go out and find our tribe that was truly connected to our identities as well. Like, where was that authentic tribe that was going to be genuinely there for us? Yeah. And you got to go back and think, like, I don't think they ever found their tribe and understand how to identify, how to build, and also how to become part of a tribe like that. There's a lot of factors when you start. It's complicated in those senses. It's a maze of emotion, and it's something that's in all the little things that you have to decipher through.
So we had to sit through a 3-hour interim study at the Capitol this summer, where they paraded one person after another through who had supposedly licked it, had overcome their gender confusion, overlicked their, had fixed their sexual orientation. And it was painful to listen to.
Oh, and
it was painful. And I felt so sorry for the people who were being paraded and trying to lead us to believe that they, and it was sad they couldn't ever really say that they had fixed themselves or changed themselves. Really, all they could say was, I've learned to control it or live with it or master it. Right. And so you live the rest of your life feeling like that any minute, you're going to fall off the wagon, like somebody who's dealing with substance abuse, that as the alcoholic says, I'm an alcoholic and I've always got to be an, abstention. And so when someone suggests, hey, I've changed, really what they're saying is, I'm now living under this moral abstinence. Because I've not actually changed my sexual orientation.
No.
I've not actually changed my perception of my gender. Right. I'm just making everybody else feel comfortable.
Right. And we get scapegoat, and the gaslight comes to us, which is we're now turned over to a depraved mind.
Right.
We
and
have
leading
now
people
gone
astray.
over. We have gone over to the dark side. But if you go into, and part of my profession is I go in and I have dialogues with even executives and leaders about how you have these uncomfortable conversations. And even in community, when we start having these uncomfortable conversations about why people rest on this fringe, on the moral dilemma of LGBTQ+, even in the diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging space in the workplace, we still hang on a fringe of a moral dilemma. So those discussions that we have with individuals in the workplace, business owners who are private business, Christian-owned businesses, where it comes into, can you explain why or how Clinton Shane is not going to be a good employee for you? Can you give me some specifics? Do you have some information? Is there some data? And it's just like, well, it's just my faith. Well, what does your faith say? It's just what I believe in. Well, what is your belief? Press those questions. If they know their faith, if they know their religion, they can defend it. And they can defend it in a way that is loving. But there's no way they're able to do that. Press those questions. Keep asking.
Yeah. Let me ask you about your work on training in the workplace, what you just described, where you're working with some situations where an employee is uncomfortable. I mean, just yesterday we got a phone call from some people who are in a workplace situation where they're housed. You know, the program they're in, the company provides the housing, the training, the skill, the healthcare. So it's a kind of an elevated high level situation. And yet they found out that the individual, that their roommate was gay and living with HIV. And so this roommate, their roommate does not want to live with them, doesn't want to be around with them. And so the company reached out to us. So you do that professionally, you help individuals. As we mentioned earlier, Oklahoma has a bill that would have made conversion therapy, kept it legal in Oklahoma, while the rest of the country is outlawing it, condemning it for what it is. We also have a bill that right now, while you and I are talking, is an active play. I call it the volley. It's bouncing back between the House and the Senate. And that bill was House Bill 1188. And it would have banned diversity, inclusion, cultural competency trainings in the workplace to address the very conflicts that you say you know, which professionally you're trained to do, what you had to, you know, deal with all the time, and then were impacted by that yourself. So the bill was introduced. We thought that legislators had come to realize it would be a huge harmful thing for Oklahoma, and we thought the bill was done. Well, another legislator believed so strongly in it, they took and stripped the language out of one bill that talked about the Red River between Texas and Oklahoma, pulled out the language and inserted this language, and now it's back in play. And we're having to deal with senators and representatives debating if cultural competency, diversity, inclusion training is beneficial, and they don't want it. They don't want any state agency, any state funded agency to have it, and they're trying to make it illegal for you to teach. Schools, hospitals, universities, state employers, to address diversity and inclusion in the workplace. What's your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Well, it's comical to me. I know it's comical to us. I always find it so interesting. I've always, my tenured as a human resources professional and a talent acquisition leader has always been in the space of understanding trends and forecasting and helping organizations, and even my clients now, build talent acquisition models that are unique to their organization. And what that means is when I go in and do an analysis of an organization, I go in and think, I'm like, this is your talent footprint. No one's applying for you because X, Y, and Z. And so when you start to hit organizations and leaders to say, hey, you want employees to help move your product or your service, you need employees, you need people. However, if you don't know how to work with those individuals, and there's high attrition, there's turnover, there's all these things, then your money's just going out the door. But what information through Harvard and through PricewaterhouseCoopers, these large studies that have been formed over the course of the last 15 years about what has been the one thing that has driven the success of so many organizations, and what they've been able to see: higher productivity, higher value within their employees, better programs and services, higher revenue, higher profits. And so what they've seen, like, it has been able to come down to a denominator of diversity and inclusion within those organizations, diverse thought that really drives your product and services forward. So the number one thing that I've always been able to go into in organizations is first get the business case of how much money it's costing them to not have these types of programs in place. So then the other side comes in, those organizations that are going to be left in the dust, those organizations that are not adopting things like this, where they're going to be left when they have exhausted all through the workforce in the labor market. But with all that, what we're starting to see a shift in the labor market is they are wanting to understand more about this. Thankfully for the leaders, you got some of these legislators that are doing what they're doing. But we have so many people legislating, lobbyists working to ensure that we have this type of training within the workplace. And more organizations, vice presidents of human resources, CEOs, there's a whole pledge with CEOs that are taking a pledge for stronger diversity, equality, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace. And so what these pledges are doing is there's actually becoming more awareness of how these models work. And the only argument that comes in is that some private employer that is Christian values within their organization doesn't want to have to bring it in there and start doing this training because it's a matter of money. That's the biggest argument they want to do. And then the other argument is the fact that it's a moral dilemma. But when you start getting down to follow the money, they'll start perking up. Those dialogues have really helped out. And that's, I'm surprised that I really, because it was, Trump was trying to put away with it. Matter of fact, disbanded as far as having this kind of training within government. And so it wasn't until the first year, but luckily there is a strong band of national leaders that are ensuring the lobbying to make sure these programs don't go away. And so it's going to be interesting how it plays out. But I've seen the positive effects, the benefits over the course of the last 10 years. When I was part of leading focus groups with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell with soldiers to see what can we do to start getting some language engaging our service members. And there was more support than anything. So I'm interested to see how this will play out, but I work in the trenches of it by doing one-to-one education. And I got to tell you, more people are seeing the benefits of these things working within their organizations. So my argument has always been a business case, like follow where the money is in that sense, because in business, that seems to be the common thing that talks. But when we talk about how we want to,
it's a clear evidence, Clinton, and probably it just now occurred to me. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I just had an epiphany.
Yeah.
That's right. I still hear from God, folks. I know some of you think I don't, but I do. So the harmful, hurtful, abusive practices of religion are still like tentacles, like octopus tentacles that are trying to reach into the workplace, trying to reach into the public square, trying to stop LGBT kids feeling safe in the hallways of their high school, or LGBTQ individuals feeling safe in where they live, where they work,
their cubicles.
And so it's not enough for them to believe what they believe in their pew underneath their steeple. They're wanting they want the world to look like the narrow view that they have.
Right.
And acknowledge and ignore. I think you said earlier, talked about the conversion therapy, that I asked you, is it as awful as we said? And you said it's even worse because it's an alternate, I think you said it was an alternate reality.
It's it's just an alternate reality. It's not even, there's no logic in it. It is a mental illness for someone to believe that it works.
Yeah, so these are just two bills that we're dealing with in Oklahoma, and I can't be remiss unless also point out that U.S. senators from Oklahoma have said they will not support the Equality Act that is presently sitting through the U.S. Senate. And one of their arguments is it'll create lawsuits, that if you make a law against discrimination, then you're just going to have a bunch of lawsuits. And my first thought was, what kind of reasoning is that? When the law says you have to treat people equally, your concern is there's going to be a bunch of lawsuits. Well, there won't be a bunch of them if it stops.
I know it is. Institutions we know are pretty much cisgender, hetero males, white males that are running these institutions. And we don't have good, strong leaders. They are legacy leaders that work in a lot of these corporate structures, venture capital companies. And so what we find is that there is no leadership skill there. And so they don't know how to work with people. So unfortunately, they have no systems within their organization, no culture within their organizations. They don't know how to define their culture. And therefore what happens, you do have a lot of lawsuits. And so what we're doing is not so much about the diversity and inclusion training. I do safe space and safe zone training in organizations to understand pronoun usage terms, also understanding what language and policy you need to implement to better have better inclusive policies and procedures. But it's just so fascinating to me that a lot of these leaders, they don't know how to put together culture. And so if there isn't culture development, if there isn't those things, then what's going to happen is if more, because Department of Labor and EOC, they just put out the numerous cases that are right now coming into place. I mean, they're a year and a half out from taking any more cases on the national level. And so again, it's interesting. It's like you want to fight it, but yet the market is saying you're doing it wrong. The Equality Act, these diversity, equity, inclusion professionals are giving you the training to make it better, but you're fighting against it. And it all comes down to the one thing. It becomes a moral issue to them, not an ethical issue, but it becomes their indoctrinated moral issue. And so their bias plays into it, and they don't want to have anything to do with it.
So I know that you and I've talked offline about you've been connected to the Trevor Project, and they connected you to your local, some local folks that you're involved with, like the Kansas City Anti-Violence Project, and then working with Rediscover, which works with foster care and youth who are experiencing homelessness, and then I believe do you serve on the Johnson County Pride Board?
Yes.
Which is kind of your LGBTQ equality organization there in that area. But at the same time, I mean, you've been through the military, you worked in corporate America, you understand how religious trauma and family abandonment affects our mental health, and can adverse childhood experiences can really derail us as adults. I mean, you're married. We know you have pets, you talked about them, but all of that sounds like you've had so many experiences that would be beneficial for people to learn from. Tell us, are you going to write a book?
We are through the rough draft. It is in creative and content editing. And by this fall, we will have my book out, Come Back Shame. I was named after Clint Eastwood. I was also, there was some real intention put to my name. My parents, both Western evangelical type people. And so I was named after Clint Eastwood. And then their favorite movie was Shame, this Western movie. And at the end, there's this kid come back Shame. And I reached out to my friend and my author and production manager on it. And I said, hey, I don't trust anyone else to be vulnerable than you. And he came over to our house and just behind me set up studio equipment. We recorded. And I said, I'm just going to tell my story raw, recorded in a microphone from beginning to end. And it started to become more, definitely therapeutic, but it also started to become more of going back and identifying how you survive through things. And I think a lot of times is we have this stigma on the LGBTQ plus community that we are weak, but I got to tell you, we are warriors by an authentic design. And I think there's some power in that. When I was going through my story and seeing the things when it comes to identifying who I was, knowing how to survive in the marginalization, knowing how to get through and identify what is mental abuse, what is physical abuse, what is sexual abuse, identifying those things that are harmful to me because I say they are harmful to me. And then getting into the behavioral mental health about how much rejection plays a part in how we see ourselves and in so much shame. And so being able to come back shame is that opportunity, reaching out to you, like up until just a few months ago, I would get anxiety and attacks, just the mere thought of coming back into Oklahoma because out of fear. And not so much that I don't like Oklahoma. I love Tulsa. I've always loved Tulsa, but the fear of being it's not about going home, of being accepted, that I worry about. It is, will I come back alive? And so many times we tell the stories of some of these, stories of individuals that come out and they said, oh, don't worry, your family will come around, parents come around, community comes around. But there's also a large portion of this that it never happens. And so we have to be able to identify those individuals, have those individuals come out to say, you are not wrong. And I'm here to tell them, like, you're not wrong. You are not wrong. You are not sinful. And there is a tribe here for you. And so this book is being able to expose those things, but also how you develop the tools to get through life in a way where you can find your authentic self. And so we're looking for that to come out in this fall. We will actually be in Tulsa here in about a month. We're going to do some film shooting on our for the trailer for the book. And so, yeah, be looking for that, all that stuff coming out.
So I think we have a question here in our, I think we have a thing from Carissa where it's dropped a question. It says, I wonder, is there like a big brother or big sister type program in Oklahoma for the LGBT community, for the young youth and young adults that don't have the family support? So I think that's for directed maybe at you, but Clinton, you may need me to help you answer that.
I don't know about Oklahoma, but I definitely do know that the Big Brother Big Sister program here has partnered with either the Center for Inclusion, and they do have some individuals, not a lot. I don't think the program is that robust just yet, but they do have a bridge from Big Brothers Big Sisters to the Center of Inclusion, and then being able to get the outreach out of those individuals.
Yeah, so Carissa, I'd answer that and say a lot of the programming at the Equality Center is purposely designed for individuals who are feeling isolated and need to connect to people. You know, it's very diverse. We have multiple identity programs, lots of supports, lots of social programming. I mean, like tonight, the Gen Q, which is our young adult program, which is for 18 to I think 26, 27. They're meeting tonight. Every week they have a meeting, but we, like every year, we host Thanksgiving where the faith communities that do support LGBTQ persons, they help us provide this huge meal for the community. And it's specifically targeting individuals who don't feel welcome in their families' homes. They either can't go home or won't go home, or they can't go home with their partner, or they can't go home and present as the gender identity that they most are comfortable with. And so I know here at the Quality Center, Carissa, I would just say we have dozens and dozens, sometimes almost weekly programs for individuals to connect to who especially have been isolated. I mean, we have programs for youth. We have families who come here who have children and they're having trouble finding support for the uniqueness of their child. Then we have programs for older adults, many of them who are in their 90s, who are cut off from their family. They're all by themselves, and yet this is their family. Yeah. So I hope that answers that question. Clinton, you've been through so much. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you've survived? Do you feel like you're thriving? Do you feel like you're still vulnerable? I mean, where do you see yourself and what you would like to devote the rest of, what do you see yourself doing for the next several years?
Well, I've finally found that my purpose is because I started out going to Bible college because I had a purpose, not to necessarily, I grew up seeing the National Geographics and seeing the pictures of other tribes in Africa and thing. And I was like, I want to go there, not to tell them about God, but to just be there and work with individuals who were poor, who didn't have opportunities like I had. I grew up really privileged on a horse and cattle ranch. And so I think my purpose, I lost that. I allowed the church to take that identity away from me, of working with youth and individuals, simply because I'm gay. I had two nieces that unfortunately for 15 years, they were kept from me because there was the indoctrination that because of my sexual orientation, I would harm them sexually.
Yeah.
Now, and so I lost that ability, and from that guilt and shame, like I lost that purpose to work with you. So what I'm looking at now is how do we stop LGBT suicide? How do we stop these things in our community? I don't want to prevent that. I want to stop it. And part of that stopping is being able to be an advocate to those individuals to stand up against these corporate bullies, these legislators, and these bullies who are trying to, again, marginalize us. So my work now is really bringing more awareness to those harmful traumas that actually affect us. When I reached out to the Trevor Project before doing my Safe Zone training, there was a CEO and executive said, what are the effects that this could cause on LGBT? And so they sent me the information of individuals in LGBTQ+ that are rejected from jobs, and what that has caused the effect as far as with suicide and those damaging effects. So what I see now in God and trying to find my way is that there is an authentic warrior spirit in all of us. And also understanding that there is a truth inside all of us. I really connected with, when I reached out to the University of Massachusetts and got involved in their stress reduction program, understanding more about meditation, understanding more about mindfulness-based practices, knowing about who you are, that truth that is inside, understanding energy and light healing. That's where it really came to, like, how do you come full circle to yourself and knowing who you are, and never, ever, ever being afraid of who you are. And I think that's what I really want to educate so many people on. Then how do we, on the community on the outside, how do we accept those individuals? How do we lay our bias and our egos aside to just welcome individuals in an authentic and genuine way, without putting any sort of judgment on it? When you think about the message of Christ, the ultimate symbol of love, I think about that, where he did not put those biases. He just loved people right where they were. And that's what I want to do. I just want to be able to get that example and put that out there, that we can just accept and love each other just as we are. And I can still love my family just as they are. I forgive them. I understand where they come from. I do understand it, and I do accept it. Does it hurt? Yeah, it's a daily pain management that you have to go through every day. But the difference is that you live in pain, or you can just separate. You don't have to live in the shame. And I don't choose to live in the shame anymore, because the shame is no longer mine.
We have been joined by our spiritual advisor, who's really covered a lot of area tonight, several fields. And he's about to release a book called Come Back Shamed. Is that correct? The name of the title? And that documents what he experienced, but what he's observed and how he sees a path forward, correct? Where
Absolutely.
we can make a better world.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us tonight on Spirit. Next week, our guest is Reverend Kelly Becker, who is the pastor of the Christian Church in Bartlesville. And we'll be excited to have her with us next week on Spirit. This Spirit episode will remain on our Facebook Live for the next several days. And then it's always, you can find it in our Oklahomans for Equality YouTube library. You want to listen to this. If you can recommend this to others, we'll be making sure that it's accessible for individuals, because we covered a lot of things. Actually, a real live survivor of conversion therapy, a survivor of corporate greeds, discrimination, and a survivor of the trauma that you experience from religious abuse. Yeah. Clinton, thank you so much for joining us. I want you to leave us with 2 words for someone who may be watching this and they just are so overwhelmed with what they're experiencing. 2 words. Give us 2 words for those people who need something.
Keep climbing. Keep climbing. There's
Very well said.
that mountain.
Very descriptive. Thank you, Clinton, for joining us. And you've been joining us here on Spirit. And next week, our guest is the Reverend Kelly Becker from Bartlesville, Oklahoma.